Welcome to the English Epics channel. She was sitting with her back to me at one of the dimly lit tables in the back. It was a small Italian cafe we used to visit, often on special occasions. In those days before we had children, her shoulders were bare and her hair was loose, which was unusual for her, but I had no doubt that it was Allison, my wife. With her was Larry Palmer, her boss. The conference had ended a day earlier than planned. John Hendricks, the CEO, had secured all the necessary contracts and was so thrilled that he gave all participants a huge bonus and an extended 4-day weekend. Since it was only a 4-hour drive from Brighton to Suffolk and still early in the day, I decided to head home. A 4-day break didn't mean much to me as I don't work as an employee. I was doing this job for my longtime best friend John, but the bonus came in very handy. Traffic was heavy, but I had no trouble reaching my hometown around 2:30. We live in a small village on the coast, about 15 miles from Ipswich. Since I had to pass through Ipswich on my way home, I decided it would be a good idea to book a table for this Sunday. Hopefully it would be a pleasant surprise for my wife. The place was full of new faces. I almost expected to see Luigi's smiling face greeting me. He was the old owner of the establishment, but I understood that time moves on. After all, it had been nearly 25 years since we were last here to celebrate the news of Allison's first pregnancy with her parents. The young woman at the reception desk was confirming the details of my reservation when, by complete chance, I heard laughter. My wife has a distinctive laugh. I'd recognize it anywhere. And that's when I saw her. I saw her with her boss, Larry. Larry and I share a long, complicated history. He was my sworn enemy in school, a classic bully, and the one who stole my first true love. Katie Ryland was supposed to go to the end-of-term dance with me. We had been seeing each other for about a month when he decided he wanted her. His father was a prominent banker from an old, incredibly wealthy family. Katie broke my heart when she went to the party with him. He promised Katie the world, and she agreed. In fact, they got married, but after countless infidelities, she divorced him about 10 years ago. A wide grin spread across his face as he sat across from Allison. I noticed their hands resting on the table, barely touching at the tips of their fingers, but touching nonetheless. He was laughing, and she had her back to me. Sir. The young woman was saying something to me, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. Sir, would you like to book a table from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, or from 3 to 5? Which works better for you? I regained my composure slightly and said, Oh, sorry, yes please, let's go with 3 to 5. My wife was wearing that white summer dress with floral patterns, the one I had bought for her in the spring. It looked stunning on her. The thin straps on her shoulders highlighted her perfect neck and arms. I always liked her in that dress. But why were they here together? And why were their hands touching? Until something like this actually happens to you, you think you'll just walk right up and kick the guy's ass, throw her out onto the street, and curse everyone in sight. But the opposite happened. I stepped back and sat down on a chair near the receptionist's desk. It felt like I had been transported back to 1993, and it was Katie all over again. I had absolutely no idea how to deal with it. What surprised me the most was that I wasn't even that angry. I just felt utterly stunned. It was as if my insides had been ripped out, leaving me with nothing to do but sit there quietly. A young woman handed me a glass of water and asked if I was okay. I nodded silently. I just needed to leave. And rushed toward the door. 15 minutes later, I parked closer to get a clear view of the restaurant entrance. I waited patiently, going over all the ways I could kill him in my mind. It was almost 5 when they came out. It was a scorching sunny day, and she looked stunning in that dress and strappy high heels. The sunlight shone through the skirt, making it seem as though she was almost naked. Her legs had always been her best feature, and she showed them off whenever she could. Larry came out a few seconds after her and wrapped his arm around her waist. There was no mistaking it, they were a couple. She leaned her head against his chest as they walked toward his car, and I felt sick. I had always been someone who took things to heart, never afraid of a fight or a confrontation. But this shook me to my core, and I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He opened the car door for her, and as she got in, he ran his hand along her leg and slid it under her dress. That same laugh echoed again. I ducked down as they drove away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Nearly 20 minutes passed before I finally started driving. My eyes were filled with tears, and my head was pounding with pain. I drove for a few miles before realizing I was near home, approaching the bungalow we had made our own, our safe place to raise a family. There were only 10 houses on our street, a quiet road. 7 of the homes were bungalows, making it feel almost like a retirement community. Large green, perfectly maintained lawns where everyone knew one another. Larry Palmer's Jaguar was parked on the road not far from my house, but far enough away for it to seem innocent. The street was quiet. It was 8 p.m. The lawns were impeccably maintained, everything was in bloom, and it all looked exactly as you'd expect on any ideal suburban street. I drove past it and parked near Oldman Brown's place at the far end of the cul-de-sac. I had absolutely no idea how to handle this. Deep down, I knew that if something like this ever happened, I'd kill the guy and maybe hurt her too before throwing her out. But the reality was that I was confused and deeply hurt. This man was doing it to me again. The worst scenarios played out in my mind. He was having sex with her in my bed. My head ached, my stomach was tied in knots, and I felt intense nausea, as though I could vomit at any moment. I leaned back against the seat and started to cry. Why? Why did she do this? I thought we were happy. Another half an hour passed before I decided to confront them directly. I sent her 2 messages, asking if everything was okay and telling her I'd see her the next day when I got home, but I received no reply. My anger began to build. She was obviously too busy to deal with a message from her husband. The 2-minute walk from my car to the driveway felt like an eternity. My fists were clenched, and I was trembling. He was much bigger than me, but adrenaline was surging through my veins, and if I caught him off guard and tackled him to the ground, I would smash his head in. His car was still there. My house looked quiet, the street was silent, but all hell was ready to break loose. I walked along my gravel driveway, the stones crunching under my feet. I remember hoping they wouldn't hear it. I took my key and approached the front door, but decided at the last moment to enter through the back. The side gate is never locked, it just closes with a latch, and is usually used when I take out the trash bins or trim the lawn. I felt foolish sneaking around my own house, trying to move as quietly as possible, avoiding windows and ducking when necessary. In the living room, there are French doors that open out to the garden at the back. We had them installed 2 years ago, and I crept up to the edge of the frame. Peeking inside, I saw a coat and a handbag on the dining table, along with a set of keys and a phone lying nearby. As I moved a little closer, I saw a bare, hairy backside perched on the edge of the table, his backside. His shirt was unbuttoned, and I assumed his pants were pulled down to his ankles. My wife was on her knees in front of him. He was standing with his back to me, while her head bobbed at his lap. In horror, I turned away and pressed myself against the brick wall, utterly shaken by what I had just seen. It was strange. The shock of seeing her doing that to him made me stagger. I think it would have been easier to see him doing her than to witness her doing that to him. The feeling of nausea returned, and I began to breathe heavily. Standing behind those doors, I felt weak, small, and my anger was replaced by sadness and despair. I peeked inside again. There was a small gap between the curtain and the window frame, and I used my phone to take a few pictures for evidence. Then I quickly typed a message and sent it to her to see how she would react. The phone on the table next to them lit up. I watched as he picked it up, glanced at the screen, and read a few words with a smug smile before handing it to her. "Your husband," he sneered, grinning. Allison looked at him, not breaking eye contact for a second, and then placed the phone back on the table. Something inside me broke, and I stepped into full view, standing in the doorway. Taking out my phone, I called her. This time her phone lit up. I saw her hand pull away from him and reach for the phone. She still didn't see me as she was preparing to talk to me while continuing to please him. My fingers clenched into fists, and I was ready to smash the glass when I heard her voice. "Hi, Steve, is everything okay?" Her head was still in his lap, and he was still watching her. Neither of them even noticed my presence. I couldn't speak. She repeated, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said quietly, my fists loosened. Her soft voice did something to me, and the raging anger inside me subsided, leaving behind only pure sadness and emptiness. I stepped back and told her I was fine and would be back tomorrow. "All right, baby, see you tomorrow." The call ended, and I sank to the floor, sobbing so hard that my entire body shook. What the hell was wrong with me? I was the kind of guy who would knock someone's head off, and here I was crying like a child. Was this really me? It didn't feel like me at all. Quietly, I walked out and headed back to my car. I didn't know yet how I was going to get back at them, but I knew I would. Until something like this happens to you, you can't honestly say how you'll react. But what I can honestly say is that I never imagined I'd react like this. I booked a room for the night at a cheap motel on the other side of town. I got blackout drunk at the bar and tried to pick fights with anyone who crossed my path. I ended up with cuts and bruises, but afterward I felt better. I got so drunk that I thought it was a great idea to send her the photos at 2 a.m. A minute later my phone lit up. I found great comfort in the fact that I had ruined their evening, assuming he was still there. I didn't respond, but that didn't stop her from trying. Then came message after message. I smiled and thought to myself, yeah, now you can find the time to text. In a moment of complete madness, I opened the photos and sent them to the kids. I regretted it the moment I hit send and desperately tried to undo it. I was so drained that I had no idea how to fix it. I turned off my phone and leaned back against the pillows, thinking to hell with all of them. The next morning I had a pounding headache and my mouth tasted like the local cats had used it as a litter box overnight. I desperately needed painkillers. Grabbing my clothes and avoiding the trucks refueling nearby, I headed to the garage shop attached to the motel. After taking some paracetamol and downing 2 cups of coffee, I opened my phone. Ping, 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 a flood of messages and missed calls came through, and the realization of what I had done hit me like a ton of bricks. Most of the messages were from Kelly and David. With a heavy heart and a growing sense of dread, I opened the first one. It was from my daughter, Kelly. Dad, what the hell? I buried my head in my hands. Damn it, what had I done? What the hell was wrong with me? What possessed me to send them pictures of their mother pleasing her boss? In what reality could that ever seem like a good idea? I had over 20 text messages and almost as many missed calls. Just as I was about to head to the shower, my phone rang. It was her, the damn adulteress. What? I snapped, anger flaring. Steve, leave me alone. I shouted, silenced my phone, and went to take a shower. 10 minutes later, I returned to find 2 missed calls and 5 more text messages. I almost deleted them without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. The first message said she was very sorry and that it was a mistake. Blah, blah, blah. The next few begged me to call her, please, and the last one asked where I was. Not a single message asked, how are you? Are you okay? Or please come home. I took a week off, spending the days drinking and sleeping. It killed me, but I turned off my phone for 3 days, not wanting to talk to anyone. Toward the end of the week, I turned it back on and it was flooded with messages. Most were from the adulteress, but a few were from the kids and my parents. I felt sorry for my mom and dad. My mom adored Allison. They were like best friends, and this might destroy her. I got back in touch with the kids and arranged to meet them after the weekend at a local garden center. I figured meeting in a public place would lower the chances of a scene. Kelly was a firecracker. She could cause an uproar in a room full of nuns, so I hoped this would help calm everyone down. Talking to my mom wasn't easy. She broke down in tears the moment she realized it was me calling. They had been beside themselves with worry. I told her I was very sorry and that I hadn't been thinking. I just needed time to process everything that had happened. The kids had told their grandparents that we had a fight and that I had been away from home for a few days. I left it at that. They didn't need to know the full story yet. The first to arrive was David, and I waved him over to the table where I was sitting. When he sat down, he sent a message to Kelly. I ordered 3 vanilla lattes and a few cream-filled pastries. Kelly walked in with fire in her eyes. It was clear she was close to an explosion of rage. Mom's worried about you, Dad, David said softly, leaning toward me. Then, in a gesture completely out of character for him, he reached across the table and took my hand in his. Damn, that broke me, and I burst into tears. Kelly's anger vanished in an instant, and she came over, wrapping her arms around me and pressing her face into my neck. You, for God's sake, she sobbed. Why did you send us those disgusting photos? I couldn't speak. Every time I opened my mouth to say something, my breath caught, and I started sobbing even harder. Eventually, after a few minutes, she asked again. Why, Dad? I was angry, Kel. I'm so sorry. Mom's really worried, Dad. Won't you talk to her? How can I? You saw what she did, didn't you? And in our own house. Please, Dad, David said, his voice softer than his sister's. Come back with us. Please talk to Mom. No. The adulteress can burn for all I care. To hell with her. They both recoiled in shock, horrified. They had never heard me speak like that before, let alone about their mother. When I saw the looks on their faces, I immediately regretted it and apologized. I also took the opportunity to sincerely apologize for sending the photos. No matter how drunk I was, there was no excuse for doing something like that to them. It took another week of constant pleading before I agreed to meet at our house, the house filled with so many happy memories for me. I agreed on the condition that our children be present. She didn't like it, but she reluctantly agreed. When I saw Allison, I was stunned. She had lost weight. It had only been a couple of weeks, but she looked pale and exhausted. Her eyes were sunken and dark, as if she hadn't slept in 2 weeks. It felt wrong somehow, but at the same time, it gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. She looked so fragile, nothing like my Allison. As I walked in, she ran toward me and wrapped her arms around my neck. I pushed her away, and she fell to the floor, sobbing. David shot me an angry look as he helped her to her feet and led her into the living room. He told me she hadn't been sleeping or eating properly since it happened and was now on medication. He said it as if it was my fault. Kelly was already sitting at the table, glaring angrily at her mother as David helped Allison into a chair. Kelly had a teapot and was pouring tea into 4 cups. I stood there, shaking my head, thinking as if tea could fix everything. I knew I should take a seat at the table, the same table that guy had sat at, the same table where she had pleased him. All I wanted to do was turn around and leave. "Dad, how are we supposed to get through this?" Kelly asked. "Mom swears it was only once and that it will never happen again." I glanced at my wife. Allison was sitting at the far end of the table, her head in her hands, quiet and alone, while I sat at this end with the kids. "I'm so sorry, kids. I don't understand how," I rasped, shaking my head. Allison let out a wail and slammed her head against the table, making both kids jump. Once again, David rushed to her side. Kelly just stared at her mother. I was surprised. I had thought David would be my ally, not Kelly. Kelly reached out her hand to me, and I gratefully took it. She held it lovingly and said, "What Mom did was disgusting. We all know that. Even she knows that. She got caught up in the moment, and she'll do whatever it takes to make it right." "I'm not sure she can, Kel," I said sadly. "Anything," Allison whispered from the far end of the table. I looked at her with utter disdain, and I think in that moment she realized it was over. 2 weeks later, with John's advice and support, I began the divorce process. The kids didn't like it, but they understood, and we divorced amicably, dividing our belongings so we both had a chance to start over. By mutual agreement, I took out an insurance policy to buy a small apartment, while Allison took out a modest mortgage to pay me the agreed remainder. She refused to part with the house and all the memories it held for her. David still sees her once or twice a week, but I know Kelly blames her for destroying our happy family home and rarely visits. After what happened, Allison never saw her boss again and soon quit her job. I put in a good word for her. After all, she is still the mother of my children, and she now works for my friend John. As for me, I live in a small fishing village on the west coast of Scotland. A year later, I sold the apartment for a decent profit. I've made an effort to integrate into village life. Most of the locals have accepted me as one of their own and do everything they can to help. I met a charming woman named Megan. She's a widow. I helped her fix a leaky roof and did other repairs around her house. I help wherever I can in the community, buy drinks at the local pub where she works, and chat with all the regulars. I also do odd jobs for free, which helps. I've changed professions and now work for one of the major oil companies here. My salary has doubled, and my life is wonderful. And of course, my revenge made things even better. They say revenge doesn't help, but I can assure you it absolutely does. 4 weeks ago, Larry Palmer was attacked in his Essex mansion. He was brutally beaten within an inch of his life. The attacker was dressed entirely in black, wearing gloves and the balaclava. A few items were stolen to make it look like a robbery. Larry's plastic surgery on his face will take at least 10 years, and his once handsome appearance is a thing of the past. He begged me, the man in black, for mercy. He apologized so many times that I lost count. At first, he confirmed my wife's story that it was a one-time thing. But later, after losing his first little testicle, he admitted that it had been going on for 6 months. At the time this terrible crime was committed, I was busy calling out bingo numbers at the local village pub. I have nearly 20 witnesses who can confirm this. My friend John helped with the transportation from a small independent airfield here to an airfield in Essex, and I was back home within 2 hours of the incident. I also made sure that our local police had a record of me visiting the station to report a minor hit and run on my car just before heading south. Larry Palmer knows exactly who the man in black was, I'm certain. Can he prove it? I highly doubt it. Unfortunately, the divorce was finalized a couple of years before I learned the full truth. But one day she'll get what's coming to her. Now, she lives in fear that one day the man in black might pay her a visit too. I would never leave my children without a mother, but she doesn't know that for certain. In the past 2 years, I haven't spoken a single word to her. All the news I get about her comes from my parents, who keep telling me she regrets everything that happened. They see her occasionally at family gatherings, which I make an effort to avoid. From time to time, the kids visit me, and I love seeing them. David recently gave me my first granddaughter. Her name is Sarah, and she's beautiful. Kelly gets along wonderfully with Megan, though Megan understands she will never replace her mother. I know it was a very foolish thing to do, and it will probably haunt me for years, but I recorded a short video. When I say short, I mean 15 minutes of agonizing screams and the indescribable suffering of a middle-aged man beaten nearly to death. I watch it from time to time when I'm feeling a little down, and it always lifts my spirits. Was it worth it? Yes. Every single second of those 15 minutes brings me satisfaction. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next episode of English Epics. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye.